Session 2 is all about data privacy and navigating that landscape in the era of AI. And really excited, for the guests that we have right now. We have Hari Valiyath and Matt Gehring. So please welcome to the stage our guests, and they're going to have a nice fireside chat for the next few minutes.
So Matt, why don't you tell a bit about yourself, what the company is, how's it today?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Gehring, I'm CMO at Dutch Pet. We're a pet telemedicine company, just about 3 years old. Essentially, we connect pet parents with our vets across the US. They're able to do video calls, messaging, prescribe, create care plans, and then we're deliver any medication needed to them. So new industry, new category, so it's been kind of fun developing that versus most of my career has been in the sort of retail space with Rothy's and Everlane most recently.
Right. So hi everyone, I'm Hari, one of the co-founders and chief business officer at Pixis. About the company, it's a very interesting story. So I dropped out from college third year. I was into professional gaming. I used to game for like 15 hours a day. That's how my GPAs came down significantly lower. And the college folks just came and told me, you're not getting a job for sure. So try finding something for yourself. The first company I started was in the generative AI space, where I had built a system that could generate games from text input. This was Gen AI when it was not cool. This was back in 2016. A system that could generate games from text input. Scaling that was a challenge because server cost as compared to what it is today back then was way more expensive. That's why we had to pivot and make a pivot where the next problem that we found out will hit the market was one, iOS 14 cookieless world where there will be data loss, there will be awareness about AI which would come in the next few years, which is when we launched Pixis. So I started Pixis in 2018 along with two of my other co-founders. Pixis today, it's an AI platform that automates performance marketing operations. Think of Pixis as a media buyer's sidekick or a companion, where things that you control manually to buy and optimize media on all these ad networks where you buy media, which is Facebook, Google, TikTok. When you run a digital marketing campaign or a customer acquisition campaign optimized for CAC or ROAS, there are 4 parameters that you control manually. The first parameter is which audience do you target. The second parameter is with what creative or content do you target them. The third and fourth being what should be the bid and budget with which you should be targeting these audiences or optimizing your ads. All these four parameters are automated with Pixis. To give you a scale of the company, we have close to 300 plus customers that use Pixis today. These are some of the brand names like Home Chef, Sonos, McKinsey, Channel Factory. Omnicom Group is a close partner of Pixis. We manage $2.5 billion in ad spends today. We are close to 450 employees. The dream is to take company public in the next 2.5, 3 years from now. So that's a bit about Pixis. We'll get started probably with the questions itself, Matt. Yeah. The first question was around, like with AI hitting the market, there is enough awareness about that AI is here. How do we now implement? So the first question arises that how have you changed the way you collect data in response to with the data loss after iOS 14? Yeah. There is not enough, I would say, user level information that you can target directly on these ad networks. So how that has changed? How that has changed your approach in terms of one, reaching out to those audiences because you cannot reach out to them directly, and second, how do you then personalize these ads for those audiences?
Yeah, so I mean, I think overall, like it's brought us closer to the customer. What we are doing a lot more now for Dutch is a lot of zero-party data, a lot of and taking that zero-party data, so we're collecting more information as they're browsing the site, as they're potentially going through registration, as they're interacting with us, pre and post kind of joining, we're a membership model. Then taking that, appending that to the first-party data we have with them, and then we might do other data appends that we get to kind of give us a better understanding of who that customer is, but allows us to kind of create smaller customer segments, right, which we can then personalize. So like we can start to develop different messaging throughout the site. So if you're going through our reg flow, if we know like, okay, you're a dog owner, you're in this state, we can start to take and change the messaging going forward, which is helping us. It is a more personalized experience, but it's also shown from test results to just create a little bit of a stickier flow. And then even in our external communication that we go back to that customer, all of that is incorporated into it.
This is more around like basically as a brand, you're going from targeting on a user level to a cohort level. which means you're identifying ICPs
Right.
that work
Yep.
based on your first-party data. So are you using any third-party to enrich this, or it's purely?
A little bit, but for the most part, we're using more of what we have and what we're getting from that
Okay.
customer.
It's interesting you mentioned this because like for a lot of our brands, when you speak to Meta and Google today, like they ask you to go broad and they ask you to go like as broad as you can and let the AI do the job. One thing which we have realized, the reason why they mention that because segmentation, like Matt was mentioning, when you do it manually, it's not scalable. So that's where you need to use AI. That's where you need to either have your internal data analytics team or your data science team segment those cohorts, which is part of what we also figured out when we built Pixis. Like our targeting engine exactly works in a similar way where part of what Matt was mentioning, but along with that, we also ingest external signals, which is data from brand fetch, SimilarWeb, SEMrush. Let's say if you want to go after pet owners, for example, you cannot directly target a pet owner on Meta or Google, in Matt's case. So how do you reach out to them? You then have proxies through which you reach out to those audiences, which is probably by the pages that they follow or the interests that they could like. So that's where like AI can play a big role in identifying these cohorts, which in a manual approach is much more difficult. I'm assuming you're doing some part of it through first-party segmentation. Very helpful. And like in terms of like AI enabling the entire team to better access data, like how has that changed? Is adopting AI a big mandate right now across the marketing org?
Yeah, I mean across the entire org. I mean I think one thing where we're using it to sort of leverage some of the data is just around summarizing content. We are a very kind of messaging copy rich business. Correct. Because we have customers that have to fill a lot of information before they talk to a vet. The vet's taking notes, so there's post-call summaries. There's a lot of information there, the messaging back and forth. And so one of the things our data team started to do is use tools to do sort of sentiment analysis. So like, okay, what's the overall mood? How do we rate this interaction? Like say we're getting customer feedback coming in. Then they're taking that and they're applying like a multi-label classification, which then is able to give us sort of, okay, based on that category, we can understand the urgency, what needs to be addressed, and then who do we need to route that to? So we get messages coming in that maybe only our vet can answer. Other times it's just like, oh, this is something that CX can handle. This is maybe something that's a partnership inquiry, like able to take that, quickly summarize it, apply those labels, and essentially kind of score it in a way so that for us, it's really about fast feedback for the customer.
Yep.
And so we're eliminating steps, making the team more efficient, just through kind of like taking that, I don't know, one example from a kind of content perspective.
In those classification of labels, are there also areas where you try to understand, like, are there specific like keywords or themes or colors that are better resonating with the customers?
Yeah. And even as we started doing this, we're adding more, there's more labels being added, there's more things that we didn't, kind of like that bucketed or areas of content that isn't getting kind of classified, and starting to develop sort of new ways to just better segment.
Okay, so like even for a lot of our customers, like when we pitch them Pixis first, the first question I ask every advertiser is, how do you make creative decisions today on Facebook or Google? Is that a team that goes and looks at your historical campaign performance, based on which you try to figure out what keywords, what themes, what offer? Should you be running more of like offer-based creatives or testimonial-based creatives? How do you make those decisions? And a lot of times the answer is purely based on manual data that the system, that the team looks at. In our case, like the way we have built system is, it creates an IP for a customer where right now all the customers are spending like millions on Meta, Google, and there is enough historical data that a system can leverage to identify what has worked historically, and based on that identify trends, like very simple trends like what type of copy, what type of language, what should be the word count, text length you should be running. Should you be running more of emoji? Should you be using more emojis in your creatives, or should you be using more offer in your creatives? So those are areas in which like we empower our customers, and it's interesting to see like that you're already doing some of those in your data labeling today internally. The second question I had was like, with the changing consumer behavior, like how do you collect and analyze consumer data, and how has this information influenced your understanding of your customer?
I mean, it does kind of go back to that like first point of the zero party and just collecting as much information we can. But in terms of like better understanding the customer, we kind of have it's like a consumer insights loop, sort of where there's different touch ways that we can kind of get information in. There's the stuff that they tell us, there's things that they're telling the vet. We're doing weekly kind of consumer interviews, just one-on-one. And through all these different touch points, we're kind of like taking insights from that, developing maybe new hypotheses that will then go out, and it might change our interviews the following week. It might change our roadmap, or maybe our customer interviews or prospect surveys, things like that we're doing. So we're augmenting that based on like what we're hearing from the customer, and then ultimately it'll feed into our testing roadmap. So and that's both consumer-facing testing, and then because we have a platform for our medical records that our vets uses, it also, we do the same thing on our vet side. So we're a little bit of a, I don't know, sort of dual marketplace in a way. And so we'll do that same type of thing to like better understand what their issues are. It's helped us identify new pain points. It's helped us develop new product lines, as well as like we're a small kind of scrappy company. So figuring out like where do we spend the time on like whatever that next project might be.
Correct. And like for all these initiatives, like the measurement of all these efforts, is it just around the conversion rate improving, or the customers being better informed, or the brand awareness shifting, or it's also around the time of your internal team that gets optimized with all these efforts?
Yeah, it's both kind of we're very kind of conversion focused. So that's one element of it, and then also because of the sort of small team of like where, like one of the biggest things for me in the space of AI is just how can we improve efficiency? Like how can I get 20% more output from somebody? How can we get more done while keeping the team small?
That brings me to my next question. That like your advice to all the retailers here, that how does someone start? Because in my view, like there is a lot of clutter around AI in the market with the boom like coming. Every tech company, every SaaS company claims to be having AI. So like one is like like if I were a retailer, how do I start? One is start thinking about which areas should I start implementing AI in, and second, like how do I evaluate those platforms?
So what we've done is sort of essentially every employee kind of has part of their goals is around like AI adoption. And how can they incorporate it into their workflow? Some of that has allowed us to, like one of our designers is, a lot of the imagery we now use is based on kind of things that she's been able to develop, which has made her team way more efficient, but it's also allowed us to kind of add more personalization into our site. So the customer who has a certain pet type, we're able to kind of tie images to what that is. It's not one-to-one yet, but the biggest thing for me is really from our content design teams, from growth teams, our analytics teams, customer service. Everybody is kind of looking at spending time each week. Part of their sort of monthly goals are around finding those things. Then as a team, we'll evaluate them and then figure out like, is it something that is truly going to improve efficiency, or is it just sounds cool and it doesn't actually give us the output?
Correct. Like it's interesting that you mentioned this, because like for one of the retailers, like exactly in a similar way, the problem statement was they wanted to implement AI and they didn't know what place to start. Like what we did was there were two parts where they wanted to be more efficient. One was saving time for the team, and it was a retailer that spent approximately $500 million on Facebook and Google. It's a sizable spend, a huge team that they had internally. And two things that they used to do manually before Pixis was, the first process was media planning, where the decision making of which first party audiences, let's say if you have a $10 million budget that needs to be spent in the next quarter, which channels, which audience to prioritize, what creatives to prioritize, which geos or DMAs to prioritize, all these process up until now was completely done manually. In my view, like system can do a much better job, because you just plug in AI into Facebook, Google, TikTok, your attribution platform to figure out like what is the discrepancy from interface to the attribution platform numbers, and system can do a much faster job at the automating the media planning process. So what used to take probably 8 to 10 hours now happens in like 2 minutes. So that's one place where we implemented AI and saw a huge lift. It was almost like some 40 hours of man hours saved for them in the long term. And the second piece, which was interesting, was cross-channel optimization. So optimizing between the walled gardens of Facebook, Google, TikTok, where every advertiser, every ad network, in my view, optimizes for profitability. So even Facebook, Google make money off the margins on CPMs. So how do you then create a system that is more democratic and like works in the brand's favor? So we linked our system to their attribution platform. It can be a GA or Adobe Analytics or Triple Whale or Northbeam, any of these attribution platforms. And it is unbiased, where it just looks at ROAS and incremental conversions. And if, let's say, there are days when Facebook does really well, let's say if it is Wednesdays 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., Facebook as a platform is more efficient. Take budgets from Google, shift it to Facebook, or take budgets from Facebook, shift it to TikTok in real time based on performance. Now, when you start onboarding a customer, the first question we get asked, which probably will be my next question to you, is, will AI replace our jobs or our team, or will it cut the headcount? Like, what's your perspective on AI replacing some of the human jobs that exist today?
I mean, I think there's definitely certain areas that potential right now, at least if I think about my team, if I think about within marketing, I don't see it replacing. What I do see potentially is those employees who don't know how to harness AI, don't know how to use the tools, they're the ones that are going to be replaced, or they're going to struggle to keep up, because you're going to have, if you've got two people and one of them knows how to really use specific tools, their output's going to be much higher, and eventually that's going to lead to that loss. But I don't think it's going to be a full replacement.
And when customers ask me this question, like, my answer to them is like, think of AI as the same era when calculators came in. That's when mathematicians were afraid that, like, what will happen to our jobs. What ended up happening was you could then solve complex equations with calculators. It is a similar approach, it is a similar analogy, where AI will just bring in velocity to all the operations that happen today. And yes, you will be replaced by marketeers who implement AI or who use AI in their workflow, as compared to the ones who don't. And the way we have seen it being adopted is, if a marketer prior to AI being implemented was churning out, let's say, we just had a session prior to this, like was churning out 10 creatives a week, with AI, like that number can go up to 40. So it's all about velocity with which these operations can be accelerated with AI. Similarly, like media buying and campaign optimization. A media buyer, in my view, can better spend their time in defining guardrails on the AI platform and guiding the AI on what to do, so that they get back time in their day. So if there are 10 tasks that they do today as a media buyer, they can focus more on strategy, and the day-to-day optimization of, like, setting up the bids, setting up the budgets, setting up the audiences is something that a system can do a much better job at. One transition that I'm seeing in some of the mature customers we have is there is an overlap now between performance marketers and data scientists, where performance marketers are eventually will become data scientists, in my view, and there'll be a thin line where the performance marketing team and data science team works together to create AI models for different use cases. So that's a shift that we would see, because we live in a world of, like, walled gardens where Facebook, Google, TikTok, all are black box. Like, with time, all these ad networks are going towards a direction of automated systems where you don't have control, which is where, as a brand, like, the first thing you should ask whenever an AI vendor comes to you with a pitch of that we have AI, one, check whether it is legitimate. Second, have a measurement approach to test the efficiency of the AI platform before you sign a 1-year contract with them. Third part, which is most important in today's world, check if your data is being shared with any open source platforms, because as a brand, the last thing you want is your data going to any of the open source platforms and that becoming a chaos at the org level. So, and that's where, like, on the Pixis side, like, for large enterprises, we have different hosting options. Like, if you're a large retailer, like, our entire architecture can be hosted on your premises. Our entire architecture can be a dedicated server space that we can create for you, so that you build an intellectual property for your brand in the long term. So that's how we have tackled it. And the next question is, like, what impact do you think AI will have on the creative teams specifically? Because a lot of content, like, we have DALL-E 2, we have Stable Diffusion, we have Midjourney, we have Sora, which was just launched. So how do you think that changes in the future?
I mean, it is going to change. I mean, that's the place where it's one of the ones where we're probably seeing the most use of it, in terms of, like, just from a design perspective. I do think eventually we're going to get to some form of on-the-fly generative personalization, where based on what I am doing, the next page I see is already going to be that. And I know there's companies that we've heard from this week around putting emotion in there, how to, like, better connect. And so it'll be interesting, like, to see how around, like, data privacy and how much information people are willing to share. I always kind of, been doing this for 20 plus years. Like, I've always kind of said, like, yes, here's my data, use it nicely, but it's more like create a better experience for me. If it creates a better experience, more personalized experience, I'm gonna be okay with that.
Correct.
What we don't want is like where it like gets used for something else. I think when you look at content, storytelling, all of that, one of the biggest things that I've heard mentions of the magic of like, oh, all this content was just here is there's two things. One, prompt design is so important, especially around content, sort of garbage in, garbage out. And the other mistake I see a lot of companies do or teams do is not involve creative in that process to where like at the end there's like, hey, how does this look? And really the whole issue with it was the input around the prompt. So like if you're trying to do stuff around content, have your content design team, your copywriting team there from the beginning, helping that engineer, helping that data scientist in terms of building something that the output will actually be useful.
Right, and like the question of like IP brings me to a discussion which I was having with a customer, which is like when you generate something today on, let's say, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, one is like it does not generate creatives or content which is brand compliant. Right. So that's where like the way we have solved for it, like the first step when we onboard a customer is they set up their brand guidelines, which is our system gets to know do's and don'ts in terms of colors, fonts, text, keywords that system can or cannot use, which are brand compliant, and we start the training from there. And this is again a system that is hosted on your server.
Yeah, you need to have internally. You need to have even just a simple brand book will help, but having a design system,
correct,
those elements in there, and even like what it's training off of, where it's pulling the content from, is really going to steer the type of output that you get.
Correct, and like I think a lot of it can also come from your historical data. So like you have an AI model where you train it with your brand guidelines, you give it access to your Facebook, Google, TikTok ad accounts. There is enough amount of historical data that a system can look at and calibrate itself, and that can be a big starting point for
especially as it starts to learn what works, what doesn't work. Can't stand how many times they want to put exclamation points after everything, but like that's where just training it, getting it to understand like what really works and that it fits with the overall. And that's the really big piece around having like your content team involved, your brand team involved, is like that the output sounds like they put it together, not it was generated.
Correct. And like even Facebook, Google, like TikTok, all these ad networks recommend you refreshing your creatives every 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That in my view does not happen in at least a lot of brands that we have onboarded. The reason behind that is like purely human bandwidth or dependency on a team. In my view, that's where AI comes in, where the velocity with which you can generate those creatives or concepts will be accelerated. So creatives will not be a blocker for your performance anymore. That will change in the near future. And it will be more around like, did you give the system the right input or the right prompt to generate the output you desired? And that's where you fine tune the AI models, and that's how the usage will evolve in the near future. So like this is where AI will transform a lot of content generation for ads, and creative fatigue in my view will be a problem that will be solved soon with AI if marketers are smart about using AI to fine tune those models for the brand. The next question is like looking ahead, what opportunities in your view AI will unlock for retailers in terms of like innovation, staying ahead of competition within the org, changes probably in the org design as well with AI wave hitting the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it almost goes back to my like employees are going to get replaced, like the ones that don't know how to use it. Same thing from a company. Like everybody's trying to get that leg up. I always say like kind of like you said before, make sure like it's not just sort of a BS AI front. And like looking at it, like what is the overall goals of the organization? Like, is it time saving? Is it team efficiency? Is it marketing ROI? Is it, so for us, like we're very, very sort of like use of capital focused. So like as a startup, it's like, every month you're burning money, and it's like you want to make sure that you prolong how long you can be around. So for us, it's looking at tools that will help us, keep our headcount flat potentially, increase output. But I think those companies that aren't looking at that and just think like it's a fad or it's going to go away, they're not going to be able to compete with, I think, the companies that are utilizing it in the right way. But it is making sure like you have a setup where internally, however you want to design it internally as your team, whether it's an exec decision, whether it's pods doing it, but making sure that the results are going to be there, that the return is going to be there, and that you're going back after you've implemented something and checking are we getting the expectations that we thought. So I think it's almost reminds me a little bit of, I don't know, 5-10 years ago when everybody attached CDP to what they were doing.
Right.
And there's a little bit of that, and I think the ones that we're going to continue to do well will be the ones that are implemented in the right way.
Right. And in your view, like going back to the same question, like there is again a lot of AI tools in the market. So as a marketer, like if you had like 10 AI companies pitching to you at the same time with the same use case, like in those scenarios, like how do you approach that problem statement?
I mean, it partly goes back to them understanding our business. Like we're a weird one that we're part D2C, part subscription, part one-on-one messaging. So for us, like example, like looking at a testing platforms, and the one that we went with had a little bit more dedicated support. We were able to get more of their team. It wasn't just sales and done, and then we're left on our own. We needed that kind of hand-holding.
Hand-holding and more of a managed service type,
And I think somebody earlier was talking about they leveraged their like private VC firm to kind of identify companies that could potentially help that they can get in early and help steer the product. I'm not at the size of company that I can do that anymore, but like that's another thing of like being open to like, hey, we're willing to test things. I mean, even if you think about Meta and Google being in those alpha tests, being in those beta tests, getting out there before the market has access to something is another way. So like it is ultimately like, okay, what's this going to cost? How long until we can be live? How long does it take to sort of operationalize? But we also try to like limit to where we're like maybe choosing between two, not 10.
Correct. No, like completely makes sense. And like the way I have done it for my set of customers, because for me, every customer I speak to, like first thing I tell them the same thing. There is a lot of BS around AI in the market and a lot of tools, a lot of clutter. So the first part of it, measure it, test it out, do an A/B test probably, where you implement AI on a few campaigns, and a few campaigns runs manually. And at the end of the 8-week test, what you want to establish is 3 things probably. Like one is insights and intelligence coming from AI. Is that something which is useful as a brand? Second, is the team saving time with these efforts in those 8 weeks of test? Third is very straightforward. Like it's a sell A, sell B A/B test, where sell A manually managed, sell B AI managed. With AI managing your campaigns, is there a performance uplift that you're seeing? If that's the case, like then one, the numbers speak for themselves. Second, the team gets empowered because they know that they can do more in their day with AI being implemented. So like that's how we design our testing approach for every customer.
I think the other thing to look at, or like what we've done, again, given small team, sort of so our data team looking at like, okay, how can we start leveraging AI more? We took it, and rather than just apply it across everything across the business, it was like, all right, let's focus just on this little area. We started with something around like our vets and their notes that they have to take, and the summaries and the information that is shown to them right before they get on a call with a pet parent. How can we use tools that will make that process more efficient? And then we'll go on to another bucket. So it was kind of like, okay, this is the quarterly initiative. We're just going to focus on this area. And then we periodically will like kind of look at that list across teams, but like look at that list of like, okay, what are we going to focus in on next? Does that still make sense? So that we're not like every week you could probably be spending hours talking about whatever the latest thing somebody just heard of. It kind of goes on the list. We find a periodic time to talk about it, and then see what we want to implement.
Right. Are there any like initial efficiency results from those experiments that probably you can share with the audience, that some improvements you've seen either in terms of?
From a creative output, what our design director has been able to do it's probably saved us a couple $100,000 a year in creative costs. And it doesn't replace photo shoots, it doesn't replace those things, but allows us to kind of go longer without that. And then I think on the sort of vet efficiency side that we've been able to sort of reduce our sort of cost per call because they have to spend less of their time summarizing, doing notes, creating the like product cart that customer is going to receive with their prescriptions. That's been another thing that like we were expecting these costs to kind of continue to go up, and we've been able to kind of reduce it, which for us has allowed us to kind of drive higher margin which ultimately lets our cache last longer.
No, that's massive. And I think in our case, like when customers measure efficiency, for them, the big problem also is like how easy it is to implement. If I want to run a test, there are 10 other things that are in their bucket list. So one thing which we've spent a lot of time on is to implement at least Pixis today. There is no code, there is no pixel, there is no IT integration. What we did was a hacky approach to build a Chrome plugin on top of Meta Ads Manager and Google Ads Manager, which is a dashboard which a customer uses every single day.
Yep.
And we run an A/B test in that format. Like average improvements that we have seen is with basic automation on bid, budget, and audiences. Like when we do the pilot, it's anywhere from 10 to 15% improvement in ROAS or CAC in the first 8 to 10 weeks of the pilot. And from there, like we have a conversation with the customer that do you want to then scale up maintaining the CAC, or do you want to keep your spend same and optimize on ROAS?
All right.
Great. Awesome. I think
we're at blinking red lights. So.
We're almost on time. Thank you so much, Matt,
Yes, thank you.
for taking the time. This was great.